the shadows, bound for the gallows, a dead man walking, till love came calling. Rise up, rise up, rise up, rise up. 6 feet under, I thought it was over, and answered a prayer, the voice of a savior. Rise up, rise up, rise up, rise up. All at once I came alive, this beating heart, these open eyes, the grave let go, the darkness should have known. You're still rolling stone, you're still rolling stone.
Hello, my name is Ryan, and I'm one of our church's many volunteers. I'd like to say thank you for joining us at today's online service. But beyond that, I'd also like to say thank you so much for your gifts of continued financial generosity. Without your support, our church's many programs and ministries simply wouldn't be possible, and they're having a material difference in the lives of people within the town of Paris and our broader community. If you are new to the church, if you're looking to connect, or if you have questions, I would also encourage that you reach out to Leah. Leah is a member of our staff and should be able to assist you with that, and you'll see her contact information on the screen. Now today, we'll be celebrating communion. So I'd ask that you please put your screen on pause, and then come back with something to drink and something to eat so you can celebrate this important time with us. I hope you have a really great day. Take care, and I hope to see you soon. Bye.
Blessed assurance, Jesus is mine. Oh, what a foretaste of glory divine, heir of salvation, purchase of God, born of His Spirit, washed in His blood. This is my story, this is my song, praising my Savior all the day long. This is my There's a grace when the heart is under fire, another way when the walls are closing in. And when I look at the space between where I used to be and this reckoning, I know I will never be alone. There was another in the fire, standing next to me. There was another in the waters, holding back the seas. And should I ever need remind of how I've been set free, there is a cross that bears the burn where another died for me. There is another in the fire. All my dead left for dead beneath the water. I'm no longer a slave to my sin anymore. And should I fall in the space between what remains of me and this reckoning, either way I won't bow to the things of this world. And I know I will never be alone. There is another in the fire, standing next to me. There is another in the waters, holding back the seas. And should I ever need remind what power set me free, there is a grave that holds no body, and now that power lives in me. There is another in the fire. Oh, there is another in the fire. Oh, and I can see the light in the darkness as the darkness bows to him. I can hear the roar in the heavens as the space between waves thin. I can feel the ground shake beneath us as the prison walls cave in. Nothing stands between us. Nothing stands between us. There is no other name but the name that is Jesus. He who was and still is and will be through it all. So come what may in the space between all the things unseen and this reckoning, I know I will never be alone. Oh, I know I will never be alone. There'll be another in the fire, standing next to me. There'll be another in the waters, holding back the seas. And should I ever need remind how good you've been to me, I'll count the joy come every bow, 'cause I know that's where you'll be. There is another in the fire. Oh, there is another in the fire. Oh, there is another in the fire.
Welcome. Glad you are joining us this week, whether this is your very first time or maybe you've been following and watching online for a while. Great that you're taking some time to spend it with us. As we get rolling today, I want to ask you a question. And one of the awkward things I realized about talking online is I have no idea how people are responding. So please just humor me and play along. And so kind of raise your hand or nod or do whatever. Here's the question. Do you consider yourself a patient person? And there can be no depends on the circumstances, just straight up, flat out, raise your hand if you think you are a patient person. With me? Yeah, good. Okay. Now, the real question is that if you're watching with someone, I want them to answer the question for you. Is the person next to you a patient person? All right, because that's the reality. That's where the rubber really kind of meets the road, is not necessarily in terms of what we think, but rather in how it is that we actually respond in the midst of life. Patience in many ways for me is like Jello. It's something we want, but it's hard to grasp. It's hard to hold on to. In many ways, patience is something that we admire, something that we strive for, but so often it is just so difficult, particularly for us who live in the West, who live in Canada, because we live in a culture that, although we talk a lot about the importance of patience, we don't really promote it in the way in which we live. You know, we're always hustling. We're always trying to get to the next thing. I mean, we're the ones who invented fast food. We're the ones who invented the microwave. We're the ones who continually groan and complain when our internet is not fast enough. I mean, here's another question. How many of you can remember dial-up, right? Like, oh my goodness, was that ever a nightmare? Like, we wouldn't be doing what we're doing right now if we were still stuck on dial-up. Here's a good test for you to consider if you're a patient person or not. How quickly and how graciously do you respond when you're sitting at a traffic light and the light goes from red to green and the person in front of you does not immediately begin to move? Like how quickly do you slowly think, I'm going to lay on the horn, or I'm ready to roll here, right? We recognize the reality. But so often in life, we don't like to wait. We don't want to be patient. And this is just in the regular realities of life. What about when life gets really ramped up? What about when you've been diagnosed with a sickness and you're waiting for results from a doctor? What about when you have lost a loved one and you're having to be patient, you're having to wait through the season of grief? What about when you're trying to make a difficult decision, a life-altering decision, and no clarity is coming? What are those times where you pray to God for wisdom? You ask for God to step into a circumstance. You ask for God to intervene in the situation, and it seems as if your prayers don't even leave the room. Being patient with ourselves can be hard. Being patient with others can be difficult. But what about being patient with God? How do we wait upon God? If you've been with us the last number of weeks, or more likely months now, we've been working through the words of James. James is the half-brother of Jesus. He's the leader of the early church in the city of Jerusalem. James was the individual that, as this movement of Jesus followers was beginning, he was the one providing leadership, encouraging them, helping them to live life with Jesus. And what you start to realize about James is that he's the individual who really paints for us the picture that when it comes to faith, it's not just simply what we believe about Jesus, but rather how that faith begins to shape our behavior. So today, in the midst of life, in the midst of this past year of working through COVID, I want to land on this question of how do we remain patient in the midst of life? How does faith and patience begin to work together? I want to look at two primary questions. Not so much jump into the question of how do we become more patient, because that's kind of the obvious route we're going to go, but rather land on the place of asking, why do we need to be patient in the first place? I mean, why is patience so difficult to hold on to? And then why has God wired us this way that it's so hard to find in life? That's where I want to go today. And so let's jump into the words of James. We're going to turn to James chapter 5, beginning with verse 7. And this is what he has to say. He says, "Dear brothers and sisters, be patient as you wait for the Lord's return. Consider the farmers who patiently wait for the rains in the fall and in the spring. They eagerly look for the valuable harvest to ripen. You too must be patient. Take courage, for the coming of the Lord is near. Don't grumble about each other, brothers and sisters, or you will be judged. For look, the judge is standing at the door. For examples of patience in suffering, dear brothers and sisters, look at the prophets who spoke in the name of the Lord. We give great honor to those who endured under suffering. For instance, you know about Job, a man of great endurance. You can see how the Lord was kind to him at the end, for the Lord is full of tenderness and mercy." In many ways, when you first look at that passage, what James is saying can actually be a little bit frustrating, because James seems to be telling us we need to be more patient. And understand again the context in which James is speaking into. It's not some ivory tower, but he's speaking into the nitty-gritty of life, where the followers of Jesus are facing severe persecution. They're in a time of immense famine and incredible poverty, where they are having to receive donations, essentially handouts from others in order for them to survive. So clearly they're suffering. And James is saying you need to be patient in the midst of it all. And then James goes on to kind of give 3 examples. One is probably familiar, 2 might be less familiar. But he says you need to be like a farmer who plants but then waits for the harvest to ripen. He waits for the rain. So we need to be patient like a farmer. And you're probably thinking, okay, that's great, but how does that help my circumstance right here, right now, James? So then he says, well, you need to be like the prophets who endured great suffering. Look at their patience. Now, prophets for us may be a little less familiar. The prophets were the individuals in the Old Testament that God would often send to draw his people's attention back to them, that they had become unfaithful. They had begun living in a way that was not honoring to God. And so God would send these prophets to bring them back. And you'd think that maybe this would be a great role to have, that you would be the great deliverer, the one who would draw them back to God. But so often, more than not, this was not a role that many would want. You see the incredible suffering and patience and the necessity to wait upon God in the midst of life. I think of Isaiah. Isaiah was a prophet who was sent by God, and as part of his message to illustrate their shame, he asked Isaiah to go barefoot and naked. Not for an hour, not for a day, not for a month, 3 years. 3 years. Can you imagine you're the prophet Isaiah being like, okay, seriously, God, like how long do I have to wait? How long until your message is going to ring true to these individuals? 3 years of nakedness. Or then there's the guy Ezekiel, where Ezekiel was told in order to exhibit the judgment of God that was coming to lie on his side for over a year. Yeah, 390 days on one side and then flip and go 40 days on the next, right? Imagine what Ezekiel must have been thinking. Like, how long, God, do I have to wait? Why are you putting me through this? Or then my personal favorite, Jeremiah. Jeremiah was sent and he spent 40 years trying to draw people back to God. 40 years. And no one listened. You can start to understand why Jeremiah was referred to as the weeping prophet. James is saying, you need to be patient and endure suffering like them. I'm like, James, that's a terrible, terrible pep talk. So he says, okay, one last example. Then there's this guy named Job. Job's story is also told in the Old Testament. Job was the individual who was the richest person around at the time. And yet in one day, without Job knowing why, he lost everything. He lost his wealth, he lost his health, and he lost his family in addition. It was so bad that his wife actually turned to Job and says, you know what you should do? You should curse God and die. Forget about waiting. Forget about being patient. Just end it right here. And I think in many ways, isn't that often our initial response? when things don't go according to plan, when life begins to get turned upside down, whether through death or through sickness or through hardship or through difficulty, we're like, God, where are you in the midst of it? And then in the midst of waiting, we're not even hearing from God and wondering, how do we respond? I don't know about you, but do you ever wonder, why should we be patient? I think the first place we'd go is, well, because then if we're not patient, we'll fail to see what God is going to do or what God could do. And I get that. And so often that is the case, that oftentimes as we remain patient, as we continue to wait upon God, if we just walk away and take the advice of Job's wife, then we are going to miss what God was about to do. And in Job's case, it worked out fairly well. Job had his life restored. Job had his wealth renewed. But that wasn't the case for the prophets. And I don't know about you and me, but that's often not the case in our lives. It's not as if faith is just transactional, that it's like something's not going right, that if we wait God out long enough, if we are patient, then God is going to do what we'd want him to do. Absolutely, there are times that through the patience and waiting upon God, we see God do some incredible things, but that's often not the case. And many of you know that, don't you? You know the reality of prayers that have not been answered the way that you would want them to be answered. And so I don't think patience and faith is simply wait it out and then see what God is going to do on your behalf. There's something so much more significant going on. Significant as to why Job would be patient, as to why the prophets would wait upon God. It wasn't simply about what God was going to do, but rather what God was going to do in them. The great story of the Bible is a story of relationship, of God wanting to be in relationship with us. And oftentimes God does his best work in these times of waiting. God does his best work in these moments of transformation. I don't know about you, but when I look back on my life and I see and I experience more the presence of God, I experience the comfort and the peace and the strength of God. It is so often not in the easy moments, but oftentimes in the challenging times where I need to stop. I need to wait. I need to be patient and continue to trust in him. I love the final words that James says in verse 11. He says, the Lord is full of tenderness and mercy. Oftentimes, I believe we experience this reality, this mercy, this tenderness, this comfort in these moments of waiting upon God. I believe that ultimately we remain patient, not because of what God will do for you, but rather because of what God will do in you. The second thing that kind of plays off this is oftentimes our ability to be patient, our ability to wait upon God is one of the greatest demonstrations of our faith. I find myself often in conversations with others who go through difficult times, who have lost a loved one, who have been diagnosed with a terminal illness, who are trying to make a decision and the answers are not only not coming, but there doesn't seem to be any easy direction to go. And what continually blows me away is in these moments when they remain faithful, when they choose to be patient and wait upon God. Have you ever considered that oftentimes our greatest witness to others is not in our moments of success, but in the storms of life, when we choose to remain faithful, choose to continue to trust in God in the midst of all of life. I think that's one of the great lessons of Job. It's one of the great lessons of the prophets. It's most likely one of the great lessons that James wanted his initial hearers to live out. Remain patient so that you will begin to see what God will do in you, and so that you can testify to others the reality of your faith. So where do we land? What does this begin to look like? If you're at a place of saying, yeah, I want to be more patient in the midst of life, I think James offers two practical suggestions. The first one is real hands-on. The first thing he says is, don't grumble. Isn't that often the place we want to go? That as soon as things are not going according to plan, we begin to grumble and we begin to complain. That's essentially what Job's wife did. Curse God and die. Like, what is the point in all of this? But grumbling never makes the circumstance of the situation any better. Actually, it often makes it worse. And so fight complaint. Fight the desire to grumble. Recognize that it's actually an indicator of us needing to kind of pull back and wait upon God. But the second thing is, I believe, the example that James was giving us when he told us about the farmer. And I believe ultimately, in order for us to be patient, in order for us to truly wait upon God, we need to see the bigger picture. Too often we are focused on what is right in front of us. And James is saying, step back and see the grand scheme of all that is going on. I don't know much about farming, but I do know this, that when you initially plant the seed, it's not like it's going to grow the very next day. You step back, you wait, you are patient because you know something greater is yet to come. I love how James, in the midst of encouraging his followers of Jesus to be patient, reminds them over and over and over again of the Lord returning, of the Lord coming again. You know, one of the common conversations around the first followers of Jesus would have been on his return, on the reality of not only did Jesus die, not only did Jesus rise, not only did Jesus ascend, but that Jesus would return again when he'd ultimately make all things right. The brokenness would be no more. And so James is reminding them, as you're in the midst of the brokenness of life, step back and see the grander scheme of things. Be reminded of God's presence, that God is at work, that God has a plan. What does that mean for you and for me? I think we step away from the temptation of just becoming so focused upon what is happening in the midst, and to take a step back and to see the bigger picture. To understand what it means because of Jesus, his life, his death, his resurrection, the promise and the hope of his return. It means that God is ultimately in control. That the final word is not what we are going through, not sickness, not death. The final word has been already said through Jesus. And so how do we do this? How do we do this in the midst of the struggles of life? I believe we continue to take steps towards Jesus. You see, Job's wife says, curse God and die. That's the equivalent of just saying, God, I am done with you. I am walking away. And patience will not be found there. Hope will not be found there. Hope is found in stepping closer and closer to Jesus. And so how do you start to do that? It's through prayer. It's through reading the Bible and being reminded of the promises of God. It's in jumping online or showing up in person to be encouraged and to be reminded that we are not in this on our own. It's through listening to music that points us to Jesus. It's by gathering around other people who want to remind us of the goodness of God in the midst of life. It's through the ancient practice of communion. I know for some of you, communion may be foreign, it may be odd, it may not be something you've ever done before. But communion reminds us again of the greater picture, the greater reality of not only what Jesus has done, but what Jesus is yet to do. It gives us the hope that That not only are we forgiven, not only do we receive mercy and grace, but that God is ultimately in control. Listen, I don't know where you are at. Perhaps you're in a difficult spot. Perhaps you've been diagnosed with sickness, or you know someone who's not well, or you're struggling with grief, or you're looking for direction on some sort of decision, and you're wondering, God, where are you in the midst of this? One of the great realities of the Bible is that patience is not just simply about us waiting on God, but waiting with God, knowing that He is with us in the midst of all of life. And so, what can you do today to take a step towards Jesus? Ryan mentioned earlier that we are going to celebrate communion. And that's an opportunity for you to join with me as we focus upon Jesus, enabling Him to be in control of all of life. And so let me pray, and then we're going to celebrate communion together. So Lord Jesus, as we come before you this day, God, you know what is going through the lives of those that are watching. You know the struggles and the difficulties, perhaps the decisions that are needing to be made. We know the temptation to so often just want to get up and walk away from you. But God, we want to fight that. We want to continue to trust in you. We want to be reminded of those words of James that you are the God who brings tenderness and mercy. And so often it's in these moments of life that we truly experience it. And so may this time of communion draw us back to you. For we ask it in your name. Amen. And so as followers of Jesus, for the last 2,000 years, we have continued to celebrate what Jesus has asked us to celebrate by taking elements of bread and of the cup and just setting them apart from common regular use so that they can become symbols of the reality of Jesus with us. Because on the night that Jesus was betrayed, he took bread, and after he broke it, he said, "This is my body which shall be broken for you. Take this and eat this in remembrance of me." Let's celebrate together. Jesus then took the cup. He says, "This cup is a new covenant which shall be sealed with my blood. For without the shedding of blood, there can be no forgiveness of our sins. Therefore, whenever you drink from this cup, do so in remembrance of me." So as you go out this day, in the midst of all of life, in the midst of decisions, in the midst of heartbreak, in the midst of hardships, may we truly heed these words of James, to truly wait and be patient upon God. Not simply because of what he can do, but because of what he will do in you. And that's a reality that comes through waiting with God in all of life. And so now may the Lord bless you and keep you. Now may the Lord make his face to shine upon you and be gracious towards you. Now may the Lord look to you always and grant you his peace, his patience, his kindness, and his mercy today and in all of your tomorrows. Amen.